Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Welcome. Now, I want to tell you, you should leave the homework assignments on the table in the corner on the right. For those who haven't done anything in writing, you're expected to participate with sharing the ideas later on in the sessions today. But welcome and thank you very much. We've got a good session to start off here today, and it's about leadership. I mean, leadership is about getting the balance right between the pressing needs of the city today and a vision for the future. Today, Mayor Nenshi is going to talk to you, and this is a mayor who has got the balance right and keeps the balance right. And as a result, is a leader in Calgary and is the mayor of Calgary, and is becoming a leader on city matters right across Canada. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Nenshi.
Thank you so much. Well, we're starting exactly on time. I'm very excited about this. I won't try to think about what time it is for me this morning. So, premièrement, merci beaucoup pour m'inviter ici aujourd'hui. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être ici dans notre capitale avec tous vous. I'm very excited, even though it's very early in the morning for me, to be here with you today. But I gotta say that I was asked to speak on the pressing need for infrastructure at the municipal level in Canada. And it's sort of strange to ask a mayor to come and speak on that topic. We don't have enough, we need more money, thank you very much. There's really not much more to say than that. But maybe a little more. And I'm happy to chat a little bit more about this. So my goal today, we've got about 45 minutes together, and my goal today is I'll speak for a relatively short period of time, and we'll have a lot of opportunity for dialogue, back and forth, and questions. Now, I should tell you that I first announced that I was running for mayor of Calgary exactly 3 years and 3 weeks ago. And so in those 3 years and 3 weeks, I have had the opportunity to make a lot of speeches. And there's a couple of Calgarians in the room, Maggie Schofield will know this, that I start every single speech by saying, I'm going to speak for a relatively short period of time, and then we'll have a lot of time for dialogue. Maggie, how many times have I succeeded in doing that? Almost never. But I am going to try. But I do get carried away a little bit. Sometimes on issues that I'm pretty passionate about, including this one. I have notes in front of me today. I'm very excited that I have notes in front of me. I'm well known for speaking without notes, and this drives my staff insane because they never, in fact, have any idea what I'm going to say. So they've been attempting to give me notes, and I have lots of great stories about the notes, but one of my favorite ones is last week I had a whole bunch of speeches to give in a row, and one of them was to the folks who work in Calgary Transit, and it was a big thank you speech for all the work they've done on our new long-term plan for transit that I'll talk a little bit about today. And as I was hustling up, it was just an informal event, and as I was hustling up to stage, Darcy, who works with me, handed me notes and said, stick to the script. They don't have much time. So, all right. So I took it up, and I put it on the podium, and I said, I'd like to thank the Royal Canadian Legion for all the work you do with young people in our community. So thank you for all the work you've done on transit today, everyone. I'm very happy to hear about that. So one of the most common questions I get as mayor is, what is the biggest challenge that you face as mayor? And it may surprise you to know that the answer is not avoiding camera phone wielding crack dealers. It is, in fact. It's harder than you think. I should tell you that we had a minor scandal in Calgary earlier this year that involved a surreptitiously filmed video of a bunch of wealthy home builders talking about how they were going to usurp campaign finance laws and elect a council that was friendly to their interests. And I was so excited. I thought, finally, we have a scandal. And then other colleague mayors decided to one-up me. A little grumpy about. I continue to try to work on a big scandal. I keep telling my chief of staff he needs to, who's in the room with us today, and a University of Ottawa graduate, by the way. I keep telling him that he needs to start writing personal checks. He told me he would be willing to write a $90 personal check. to cover off my Coke habit. It's actually a Diet Coke habit, and we are fully out in the office. It's terrible. All right, that's it. No more bad jokes about other mayors. What is the actual answer to the question? And the actual answer to the question is managing the diverse needs for service delivery within a municipality with incredibly limited sources of funding. So in this country, through much of the decade of the 2000s, we talked a lot about the fiscal imbalance. And when we talked about the fiscal imbalance, we seemed to be talking about the relationship between the central government here in Ottawa and the provinces. We talked about regional disparities in wealth, but that's not the fiscal imbalance in this country. The fiscal imbalance in this country is something very, very different that we don't talk about nearly enough. Let me tell you about my world. The city of Calgary takes 8 cents of every tax dollar that a taxpayer sends. 8 cents, 8%. My operating budget at the city of Calgary is $3 billion a year, of which about half, about $1.4 billion, comes from the only source of taxation that I have, which is property taxes. The worst possible form of taxation, and particularly the Alberta property tax and the way in which the Alberta property tax is calculated is even worse. In fact, if you were going to, as an academic exercise, try and design the least fair, most regressive form of taxation you could come up with, you'd probably come up with the Alberta property tax. So that's our only source of taxation revenue. That's about half of our total revenues. The other half comes from user fees, things like utility fees, transit fares, franchise fees that we charge on utilities, and so on. That's it. So $3 billion a year. Meanwhile, taxpayers in the city of Calgary send to the province of Alberta $4 billion a year more than we receive in all provincial services. So 1.25 times the size of my entire operating budget. Our imbalance with the federal government is $10 billion a year. Now, this may just sound like a lot of whining, but we have to think hard about what the implications are of that on people trying to live their everyday lives. Now, I use a line all the time when I'm speaking in Calgary, and I'm probably, it's a bad idea to use it in Ottawa, but I'm going to anyway. I can never remember what it is the federal government does. They have all the money, but I don't actually know what it is they do. Defense, international stuff. Can't come up with much else. They keep this city going. And I often say that if the federal government were to disappear while we were sitting in this room, now it might be a little different here in Ottawa because people may see their paychecks go away, but if the federal government were to disappear while we were sitting in this room, it would probably be a week or two before any Canadian noticed. If the provincial government was to disappear while we were sitting in this room, well, you'd notice pretty quick if you were in school or in the hospital, but it might take you a few hours to notice. If your municipal government were to disappear while we were in this room, well, you'd have no roads, no transit, no clean water, no electricity distribution, no parks, no recreation, no arts. And you'd notice pretty quickly, because you'd be dead. So across this country, every single day, municipalities provide the services every hour of every day that people need to live happy, healthy, and safe lives. Oh, did I mention police, fire? Yeah, you'd be dead. So it's hard to live without these services. Yet, although we are amongst the most urban nations in the world, although 80% plus of us live in cities, although the 11 largest cities in Canada account for almost the entire GDP of this nation, here's a quick question for you. What percentage of the Alberta GDP comes from agriculture? You know, we have fields and fields of grain, dairy farms, ranches. What percentage of the Alberta GDP comes from agriculture? Give me a guess, anybody. Two. Not bad, 1.4%. And so despite the fact that we are this incredibly urban culture, we live under rules from 1867 that were written from an agrarian society. and we still live in those 1867 rules. So when you hear me talk, or Jim Watson talk, or Gregor Robertson talk, I would have said, or the mayor of Montreal talk, but there isn't one. So, all right, I need to stop. When you hear us talk about infrastructure money, when you realize that such an important part of our job is holding out our hats and asking for a little more, please, sir, I want you to understand something. We're not asking for a handout. In fact, what we're asking for is a small tax rebate on the money that the taxpayers in our cities pay to keep this city and this country working. And I want to be very, very clear about this. I want to be very, very clear about it. The people of Calgary do not begrudge the fact that we have to participate financially in making sure that the province and the country work. We're happy to pay our part. We know that the people in Oyen, Alberta could never afford to have a hospital on their own. We understand that the people in Rockyford, Alberta can't afford water treatment. There's just not enough of them. And it's important for us that Oyen has a hospital and Rockyford has a water treatment plant. It's important for us to pay the freight for a lot of important national programs. If I could come up with any, it would be easier to give that example. But it's important for us to do that. We're proud Albertans, we're proud Canadians. But we have to recognize something else. And that is that those taxpayers, those sources of revenue for the other orders of government, you'll notice I never ever say senior levels of government. That's a misnomer. But that the tax revenue for those other orders of government comes from the fact that people want to live in our cities. The one thing that Canadians across the country are always shocked to hear when I tell them is that the oil sands, the Alberta oil sands, the cornerstone of the Canadian economy, Canadian energy, the oil sands are nowhere near Calgary. The Calgary Tower is not, in fact, an oil derrick. The oil sands are, in fact, and this always surprises Ontarians in particular, the oil sands are, in fact, almost a 3-hour flight from Calgary. They're almost as far away as Toronto. And so you have to ask yourself the question, why is it that those head office jobs are not located in Houston or New York or Shanghai or, God forbid, Toronto? Why are those head office jobs in Calgary? And the answer is because you think about it, Calgary's 2.5-hour direct flight away, Toronto's a 3.5-hour direct flight away. Houston is a 4.5 to 5-hour flight if you got a fast plane. So why in the world are those jobs in Calgary? And the answer is very, very simple. It's very, very straightforward. People want to live there. We continue to be able to attract the best people, as I always say, the best graduates from Dubai, Shanghai, Mumbai, anywhere else that ends in I, to be able to come live there. That's why I'm in Ontario this week. It's not just to speak to all of you. It's to talk to young people across Toronto and Ottawa about the fact that we have a labor force shortage and incredibly great opportunities for Canadians in Canada, in Alberta. And these are the things that are important. It's the cornerstone of being able to have economic growth. But those taxpayers won't live there. And those other orders of government won't be able to get the tax revenue from them if our cities are lousy places to live. If our infrastructure is lagging, if people can't get around, if people can't have access at a reasonable price to clean water, if they don't have a vibrant urban fabric with arts and culture and sport, if these things don't exist, that talent will leave. And when the talent leaves, the taxes leave. So when we ask for those tax refunds from the other orders of government, that's really what we're talking about. So that's the context. Let's talk about what that terrible word infrastructure means. I try not to use that word. People's eyes glaze over when we talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about what that actually is. What are the key areas that we need to invest in? And I would argue to you today that there are, in fact, 4 of them. These are the 4 that I think we really need to have a national conversation about. The first is water and wastewater. The second is rehabilitation of existing transportation infrastructure, or as I call it, fixing roads and bridges. And the last two, no surprise, you know them well, housing and transit. And those are the conversations that we really need to be able to have as a community. Let's just talk about transit for a minute. I'm not telling anything new to anyone in this room when I tell you that Canada remains the only industrialized nation that does not have a national transit strategy. That is a shame. It is very, very wrong. I was quoted in the Globe and Mail earlier this year as saying that there are fewer subway lines in all of Canada than there are in the city of Boston. I was wrong. I miscounted the Boston Silver Line. I forgot it was a BRT, even though it looks like an LRT. So in fact, there are fewer subway lines in Canada than there are in the city of Boston, plus 2. So these are, this is a big problem. It's a national problem. Let's talk about Calgary, for example. One of the things I did when I was elected is I asked my colleagues, as I mentioned at the top, at Calgary Transit, to create a new 30-year capital customer service and operating plan for transit. It's called Route Ahead. Check it out at routeahead.ca. Relies heavily on BRT, relies heavily on crosstown transit instead of funneling everyone through hubs and spokes downtown. It's a great plan. It's a great plan. It'll make a huge difference in the everyday lives of well over 1 million people every single day. The challenge is that it needs $12.9 billion over the next 30 years. $12.9 billion. I currently have $0. So there's, I like challenges. The $12.9 billion means that starting in the next couple of years, we need to put aside $500 million every single year, specifically for capital upgrades to transit just in my city. It's impossible to conceive of how you do that using only the property tax. It's impossible. It means I would have to increase my property tax by almost 25% simply to pay for transit in capital needs every single year. We can't do it. So to give you an example, there is one new LRT line in there, just one. But that new LRT line from the north edge to the south edge of the city, we're calling it the green line. I keep wanting to call it the purple line, and they keep saying no. I don't know why. That will double the amount of rail transit we have in Calgary just in one line. The existing system is just under 40 kilometers long. That new line will be 40 kilometers long. That's $5 to $6 billion in a city whose operating budget is $3 billion a year. So clearly, cities do not have the capacity to build the stuff we need. And we should ask ourselves, why is it so important? Why does Calgary need that LRT line? Why do we need to invest in infrastructure in this way? And to answer that question, we have to remember why it is that people live in cities. I would argue to you that the answer is one word, and that word is access. I live in a city because I need access to a job, I need access to educational opportunities, I need access to services and amenities and things that make me happy about living in a place. I need access to all the things that I need in order to just live. And if we don't give people that access, if people can't move around our cities, if they can't reach those services, we're in big, big trouble. We're in big, big trouble as cities, and we're in big, big trouble as a country. So where do we go from here? What do we actually do about that? Well, first of all, it's time to have a serious conversation with our provincial governments. We need to make sure that we are allowing our cities, especially our big cities, to control our own destinies. That means new and different and better funding sources and much broader authority to deliver services. The cities of Calgary and Edmonton are currently in a joint negotiation process with the province of Alberta to craft new city charters, to understand that accountability much better lies within our city governments than within our provincial government. It's not going well. And one of the challenges there is that it is very difficult for the folks in the other orders of government to actually understand how accountability works at the municipal level. I submit to every one of you that municipal politicians, municipal government across this country is far, far, far more accountable to citizens than any other order of government. And ultimately, citizens deserve the ability to have the order of government that they elect that's accountable to them, delivering the services and having the funding for the services that they deliver without having to enter into an endless game of bureaucratic pass the buck. And don't get me wrong, our current system is fantastic for politicians. It's fantastic. People say to me, Mayor, we need a new LRT system. And I say, I really wish we could build it. Go talk to the Premier. And the Premier says, well, it's the Mayor's job to determine what the city's priorities are. Go talk to the Mayor. We can do it all day. And we all get political benefit from it, and no LRT system ever gets built. And that is the challenge that we have. We need to be able to align the funding with the order of government that actually delivers the service. You know, I often say that one of the interesting things about being mayor, this is true, and those Albertans and Calgarians in the room will know it's true. If I walk down the streets of Calgary with the Premier, who do people stop? Who do people want to talk to? Who do people want to take pictures with? It's not just because I was elected the third time in a row sexiest man in Calgary this week. Which says at least one element of my lobbying of the provincial government to de-access eye exams is working well. But it's because mayor is a unique job in Canada, a unique political job, because the mayor is the only major political office in this country that is elected by every one of the citizens that the mayor represents. We're not elected in a ward, we're not elected in a district. Every single person in Calgary of voting age had the opportunity to vote for or against me. They saw that name on the ballot. I don't hide behind a political party. It's all me. It is in fact the purest form of democracy we have in Canada. And as a result, for me, it's extremely humbling, overwhelming, but also exhilarating that every single person in the city has a stake in me. That at some point, every single day, I have the opportunity, even for a second, to hold the hopes and dreams and fears and challenges for the future of their community of every single citizen in my hands. Yet I don't have the ability to do much about it. And that is extremely challenging. Let me give you an example that has nothing to do with money. Almost a year before I was elected, in a residential neighborhood in Calgary on the banks of the Bow River, an old gas station sprung a leak in its underground tanks. The plume of the gas leak almost reached the river. We know it's there. We know it needs to be cleaned up. Nearly 4 years later, people are still out of their homes. It still hasn't been cleaned up. And the reason for that is very simple. The city has the local knowledge and the expertise and the capacity to enter into that land, clean it up, and send the owner a bill. We do not have the legal authority to do it. Only the province can enter the land. The province's Department of Environment, horribly understaffed, dealing with other issues, simply does not have the local knowledge, the capacity, or the skill to be able to do the job. Net result, 4 years later, people still can't live in their houses. It's a disgrace. And we have to figure out how we fix it with our provincial governments across this country. And of course, different cities have different relationships with their provincial governments, but I submit to you, none of them work well. And in the absence of constitutional change, we have to figure out a better relationship, particularly between our large cities and provincial governments. I was very, very optimistic that we'd be able to do that in Alberta with our new provincial government and our new premier and set an example for the rest of the country. Today, I am far less optimistic. Let's, given that we are here in Ottawa, let's talk about the federal government. You heard from Brock Carlton, I think, yesterday, and you will know that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities was very, very happy. You don't hear that sentence very often. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities was very happy. Was very happy with the 2013 budget. The 2013 budget did a lot of really good things for municipalities across this country. Extending the Building Canada Fund, a very, very good thing. Making permanent and indexing the gas tax to inflation, a gigantic thing. A gigantic and incredibly good thing. But these things still live in that paradigm of the junior level of government getting scraps from the table, not seeing that junior level of government as being, in fact, the economic engine that allows those scraps in that table to be there in the first place. So we need to think bigger. We need to think bigger about how this all works. And in particular, I alluded to our major priorities before. We need to think hard with the federal government about two of them. One of them is we still need a national transit strategy. We still need to think together what we're going to do to deliver transit across this country. And by the way, if I'm being provocative, I may as well say that means treating the big cities differently and ensuring that that funding goes to the big cities whose needs, particularly for rail transit, are orders of magnitude higher than the others. It can't be a per capita program spread across this entire country. And that terrifies federal government when we say things like that. But let's remember something. This federal government, this prime minister is a constituent of mine. He doesn't seem very excited that the LRT is being extended to his neighborhood, but I keep telling him that, you know, he can just take the train downtown to City Hall to come see me when he wants. Strangely, he's not that excited about that. But this federal government spent the better part of a decade searching for its majority in Quebec. It didn't find its majority in Quebec. It found its majority in Canada's big cities. It already had it in Calgary and Edmonton, but it found it in Vancouver and it found it in Toronto. And so, believe it or not, this particular federal government is an urban government. And I hope that they remember that as they're thinking about the programs that we need in order to make our cities and our country work. Now, I will tell you the biggest surprise in Budget 2013 for me, and I think for most of us in municipalities, was the very surprising commitment, 5-year commitment to housing. This is the first time in a long time we'd seen a federal government make a commitment. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a halting commitment. It's a very small amount of money. It won't make much of a difference, but the fact is the federal government signaled that they believe that there's a permanent role for the federal government in housing across this country. That is a big deal. It is a huge deal as we look at the desperate housing needs across this country. I mean, many of you know that some $14 billion a year in programs in housing are set to expire starting next year. And this is an incredible opportunity for us to have a real national conversation about what the appropriate role of federal and provincial and municipal governments is in housing. Just yesterday, day before yesterday, we had a long session at Calgary City Council talking about our role in housing. And fundamentally, it was an interesting one. We have no constitutional or legislative authority or responsibility for this. But if there's not enough housing, we deal with the social disorder and the problems that that results in. So the City of Calgary spends a ton of money on housing every year, and we're happy to do it. We think it's an important thing to do, but again, we need the fiscal tools in order to manage that. So housing and transit. Those are the things we really need to focus on. I should just say for just a moment something about water and wastewater, and then I will wrap up quite quickly. In Calgary, we have approximately $3.4 billion in debt. It's probably, our debt rating is very, very good. The debt rating agencies say that our servicing is excellent, that we're very fiscally capable of managing that debt, but it still makes me nervous. What's interesting and what most people don't know is that the vast majority of that debt is actually water and wastewater infrastructure. The City of Calgary is one of the few cities that when the federal government promulgated new standards, instead of saying, wait, we don't have the money, and continuing to dump our sewage in the harbor or whatever, we don't have a harbor, so we can't do that, we just built it. We just built to it, and it was all entirely debt financed. So our kids and our grandkids are going to be paying off that debt because one order of government promulgated standards that were good standards, but didn't back it up with any fiscal tools in order to pay for them. And cities across this country are facing a water and wastewater crisis. We're not in Calgary, thanks God. But they're facing a crisis on this situation. And I tell you, last year, nothing to do with our system. We just had a small accident, and we had to issue a boil water warning for a couple of neighborhoods in Calgary for a couple of days. It's the first time we'd have to issue a boil water warning in a long, long time. And really nothing to do with our infrastructure. That's not what I'm complaining about. It was an accident with silt, and that's as much as I know. But that moment made me realize just how fundamental the fact that Canadians and cities across this country can turn on the tap and get clean water, is how fundamental that is to the way we live our lives. And if cities across this country are unable to provide even that service, we won't be able to do anything else. It's the ground for everything else that we do. The last thing I want to say today, before we get into some dialogue, is just to talk for a moment about why this all matters. We've created something very special in this country, and I don't think we're proud enough of what we've created. We've created a country where a politician can stand on a podium in a beautiful room like this and say the following and actually know it to be true. We've created a country where every single kid in every single corner of this nation, regardless of what they look like or where they come from or what their family looks like or where they choose to worship, every single kid in every single corner of this nation has the ability and opportunity to live a great life. And that happens in our cities. I'm going to be telling a story a lot over the next couple of days in Ontario. I've told it about 1 million times, and in Calgary, everyone is sick of this story. But I'm going to tell it anyway, because I think that it really encapsulates what it is we're trying to do as a nation. And that is that last year I had the opportunity to visit the 100th anniversary of a school in downtown Calgary called Keynote School. Keynote School was named after the former Governor General of Canada who came to open the first Calgary Stampede, also 100 years ago. The Duke of Keynote, the grandson of Queen Victoria. And it is a school in the downtown of a major city, and like schools, a public school, and like schools in downtowns of major cities everywhere, it's often the first stop for people who are new to this country. And I went to that school for their 100th anniversary, and I looked out at those kids all wearing their matching t-shirts celebrating their school's 100th anniversary. There were 240 of them. They came from 61 different countries. They spoke 42 different languages at home. And I had the opportunity to talk to some of those kids that day, and some of their parents. And I asked them about their stories, where they had come from, what they had experienced. And I heard horrible things. Stories of war, degradation, poverty, violence so horrific you can't imagine a human being doing that to another human being, let alone in front of a child. The one and only thing these kids had in common was that they came to this country with absolutely nothing. The lucky ones had their parents, the unlucky ones didn't. And it would have been easy that day, standing in front of those kids in their matching little t-shirts, to lose a lot of hope, to feel despair for our world, to feel despair for what human beings are capable of doing to one another. But you know what? I didn't. Because I had one of those great epiphanies that morning. I had a moment of absolute clarity. I knew one thing to be absolutely true beyond all else. And that was simply this, that whatever had happened to those kids, whatever wrath some vengeful God had visited on them and their families, they had one enormous stroke of luck. And that enormous stroke of luck was that they ended up here. They ended up in Canada, they ended up in Alberta, they ended up in Calgary, they ended up at Keynote School. They ended up in a community that has a stake in their success. They ended up in a place where the community was going to catch them if they fell, was going to make sure they didn't fall again, and was going to help them on their way. And I knew at that moment that every one of those kids was going to live a great life. And that is the promise of our country. That is the promise of our cities. That is the promise that I fight for every day, and it's the promise that I hope every single one of you fights for every day. That promise needs to be fulfilled for every single one of those kids. That's why we do what we do. That's why we do what we do. And I hope that every single one of you will be recommitted to making sure that those kids and the ones like them in all of your communities have that chance to live a great life. All right, thank you all very much. Let's have some conversation. All right, so questions, thoughts, comments, reflections. Tell me I'm an idiot. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Paul McKinnon from downtown Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mayor Mike Savage said to say hello.
Hello, right back. I have a beautiful picture of him the last time I was in Ottawa with Mayor Hazel McCallion. He had been elected 10 days earlier, so it was the newest and the oldest mayor.
Well, he's a beautiful mayor. He often gets mistaken for Brad Pitt. There's a video online describing exactly how that...
Me too.
Yeah,
Maggie, tell them what's on the cover of Fast Forward this week.
Yeah.
Everyone knew this would happen. There's a giant picture of me that says, Nenshi is sexy.
Yeah.
Everyone who's known me ever predicted that would happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
No, I'm completely discombobulated. No, so yesterday we had a bit of a conversation, and Brock Carlton was here from FCM, and so I'm part of a group, and Maggie from downtown Calgary is as well, called the Canadian Issues Task Force, which is kind of a subset of the International Downtown Association. So a couple of years ago, we got together here in Ottawa. We produced a downtown declaration, which really was kind of meant to be a bit of a manifesto in terms of what the downtowns, particularly of Canada, needed from federal government in terms of support. So one of the things that we talked about in that was the need for kind of a singular voice at the federal level that could deal with city issues and urban core issues. And this idea about trying to recreate a ministry of urban affairs or a ministry for cities or whatever. So in chatting with Brock, I don't know if this is an official position of FCM, but Brock said they've discussed it. They're not that crazy about the idea because then they figure maybe with a single voice it's even easier to ignore cities. I'm not sure we could have a great conversation about that. But I wanted to get a sense from you about what kind of changes at the federal government would be required to give, say, in particular the big city mayors, I guess, but FCM as well, a voice. I mean, is that a good idea to try and do something like that, or
no.
what's the best mechanism?
I don't care, to be blunt, right? Because I think the challenge here is that if we allow ourselves to look at the problem in the frame of the federal government, how do we manage this with a ministry? What deputy minister or director general do we actually report through, blah, blah, blah? We've already lost the game. The fact is that municipal politicians should be able to set their own priorities. When people ask me what I want from the federal government, I say I want three things from the federal government. I want our money, I want our money, and I want our money. And to me, that's fundamentally what it's about. And figuring out what those programs look like. Are they dedicated to transit, for example? Or are they open programs like we have in Alberta for infrastructure for the local authorities to determine how best to spend? Those are the kinds of conversations that I want to have. Creating, I think, a bureaucracy within the federal government is self-defeating. What we really need to do is figure out ways to transfer taxation, authority or powers, and sources of funding that are long-term, stable, and predictable. That's really all I care about. When I talk about route ahead, our transit plan, for example, I'm not expecting anybody to show up at my doorstep with a check for $13 billion. I might ask Nigel Wright, but I'm not expecting that to actually happen. But what I need is the ability to plan forward. So if I want to build that purple line, $5 billion, I need to know precisely how much money I'm going to get every year so that I can actually borrow against it. I keep calling it the purple line, eventually it'll sink in. And so that's what I'm really looking for. So if you create a ministry and you spend a bunch of money on the ministry, frankly, I'd rather have the money there to actually serve citizens and provide them what they need. So as I say, I don't really care how the federal government organizes itself or how it sorts itself out. What I care about is that they wake up to the needs, politically wake up to the needs of our cities and fund appropriately. And really that's it. And in this particular federal government, we all know, it's not much of a secret, that all those decisions are made in one office by one guy. And if he just makes a decision, then I'm happy with it. Simple as that. Oh my gosh, so many arms. Yes.
Is there, we're federated, obviously a federation, and is there an example that you would emulate as a federation relationship with cities that we could follow in Canada, another country that's doing it right?
Certainly we can look at other countries, everything from the United States to Australia, and look at the way that cities are managed with their provincial and state governments in particular, as well as their federal government. I don't know that I've ever seen a model that really, really works. But that's not a problem. We're creative people in this country. And I think we can come up with one. And there are always going to be problems. You know, I'm looking to a city charter in Alberta, and my colleagues in Vancouver point out that Vancouver's been a charter city for over 100 years, and it doesn't work either. And presumably, and you know, in Saskatchewan, for example, Saskatchewan actually works pretty well. Surprising, right? The province you think of as the least urban is probably one of the ones that gets cities the best. And one simple thing that they do in Saskatchewan is that they share the sales tax with the cities. Brilliant, simple idea. We don't have a sales tax in Alberta, so that's not going to happen anytime soon. But these sorts of things, we can pick and choose. So rather than slavishly following one model, I think we have the ability to sort it out in a way that makes sense to us as Canadians. Yes, right in the front.
Thanks for your remarks, Mayor Nenshi. My name is Marnie Kapp. I'm from Toronto, and I think I agree with almost everything you said. I think a lot of what you said, there's a common theme that speaks to leadership. And although you've joked about some of the other mayors in Canada, I think I lost my sense of humor somewhere between the groping episode and the crack cocaine. But in any event.
That was just last Saturday night for me in Calgary. Is that what you're talking about?
I mean, it does speak to leadership.
I think my chief of staff just fell over. He was just tweeting it. Anyway, go on.
There's, I think, a bit of a shaken confidence in the institution of mayors. But I wanted to specifically go back to something you said at the beginning. And I think facetiously you were groping to think about what the federal government did, and then you told us what the provincial government does and municipal government. And what I think is true is that the average citizen doesn't really know who does what in terms of delivery of services. 100%. And I think that the mayors, the leaders of municipal government, somehow have to get the message out so that the people understand that the leader of a major city is responsible for more than just fixing potholes. And these are that's the sort of short form phrase that I get in the sort of taxi driver survey before elections, who you're going to vote for and why. And they said, you know, one said, I just want to vote for a mayor who's going to fix the potholes in front of my street. And we said, well, you know, I prefer someone who has some vision of where the city's going to go, et cetera. And they said, that's what the province is for. So I think there's a lot of work to be done so that the message does get out, so that there is a little bit more support from members of the community for enhancing that municipal role.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, fixing the potholes is really important. My poor colleagues in Edmonton had a miserable winter, and boy, do they know how important it is to fix the potholes. It's the number one thing they hear about. The number one thing I hear about these days is dandelions and mosquitoes. You know, we've had a lot of rain, and we got to fix these things. They're actually quality of life issues, and it would be very, very foolish for us to think that those things don't matter. But they do matter. And especially right now, if you come to Calgary, it's a beautiful city, but man, oh man, are there a lot of dandelions. And so you've got to, we've got to focus on those things. But I will tell you one thing about your city. I was at the FCM meeting in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, and every single time I saw a Toronto councillor, and oh my gosh, there are a lot of them, I gave them an unsolicited lecture. And the unsolicited lecture was, use this as an opportunity. Toronto is a great city. It's a resilient city. No matter what we do as local politicians, we're not going to screw it up. It will continue to be a great city. And I think that's true of every city in this country. But use this as an opportunity to show Toronto that your council can be good, that your council works. Reach across the aisle, understand that every single one of you was elected because you love your city, and figure out ways to make your council work better and deliver the services your citizens need, and just do it. Don't be distracted by the did he or didn't he, is there a video or isn't there a video garbage. Just get your job done and show your citizens that your city works. And that was usually met with bemused stares from the councillors and who are you? Why are you lecturing me? Used to be a professor, you know, can't get that out of my system. But I think that that's the important thing to remember, that look, no matter what we do, we're not going to screw it up too badly in our Canadian cities, but we have the opportunity to make our cities even better. as local politicians. And that's what we've got to focus on, I think, every single day, and continue to give that story. And you know, one of the funny things, I'm a little bit surprised to hear about the taxi driver story, because one of the things that I hear in my own city is that while they understand that our primary job is about potholes, I don't think anyone would ever think in Calgary that the premier is the embodiment of Calgary, even though she's a Calgarian. I don't think anyone would ever say that. That's what they expect their mayor to do. They expect their mayor to be the face of the city everywhere. At least that's been my experience, and we have to be able to do it as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Mayor, just one more
Yes.
question. It should be the last one. Thanks.
All right?
Thank you, Mayor Nenshi. Lise Bircher from the City of Guelph and also an FCM board member. Certainly one of the key planks of FCM is to look for a national transit strategy and to deal with all movement systems in a national manner. You mentioned that big cities need to be treated differently with respect to transit, which I agree to some extent. When I look at how it's happening in very urbanized parts of the country, Southern Ontario, BC, et cetera, it clearly requires that we look at those things collectively. And I think we often pit one against the other. Our area is close to KW. We recently had the opportunity to engage GO coming into the city in addition to VIA, and then the feds immediately yanked part of the VIA service. I mean, there are things that, connected for one, the linkage from the southwest to Montreal, et cetera. So it's clear to me that those things need to be dealt with in an integrated way. How do you see the city agenda, the larger city agenda, linking to support those initiatives in a national way?
So we have to understand that the issues that you're talking about are regional issues that we need to deal with as regional issues. But those regional issues are also largely due to the fact that there's a major population center in the region. KW is probably the only example that I can think of where you're looking at rail transit that doesn't link into transit to a large city. And so I think it's actually the exception that proves the rule. So when I say large cities need to be treated differently, if we're thinking about Toronto, I'm not talking only about Steeles Avenue South, right? We are actually looking at what does that region look like with that city at the heart of it, same in Vancouver. Calgary, we're a little luckier because it's a unicity, something like 93% of the regional population lives within the city limits, which is great. Makes my life a lot easier. But when I talk about a big city transit strategy, that's really what I mean, is that we have to have these strategies that are anchored in what people are trying to do, which is they're trying to get in and out of these big cities to get to work and manage the other parts of their lives. So certainly regional strategies are an incredibly important part of that. But again, we would end up treating southwestern Ontario very, very differently than far northern Alberta, for example. And I think that's the piece that the federal government hasn't quite got its head around yet. We have to stop, don't we?
We do.
All right.
But thank you very, very much. On behalf of everybody, it's an inspiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.